awesome thumbnails are insanely important to getting someone to click on your video, but it's also one of the hardest skills you can learn. Give me a few minutes of your time and I can show you how to boost that sweet click-through rate. As a bonus, I can take you through some of my favorite thumbnails as of late, including one that I think might be the best ever on YouTube. Look at this thumbnail from Linus Tech Tips. Linus has a secret when it comes to making thumbnails. Linus often sets very clear and interesting expectations with his thumbnails. This one is no different. He is supposedly going to cool his PC with the water from the pool. He uses text to say this, but also shows the desktop completely underwater. Not only is this absolutely the most ridiculous thing to see, you also feel like he probably will electrocute himself for the sake of the video. Something he has done before, believe it or not.
I'm gonna charge your body and see what happens.
Okay.
Also, look at that smile. You know it took him like 70 tries underwater to get that picture. This is a must click for me. And also the best use of a generic red arrow against a blue background I have ever seen. More on that in a bit. Congrats on the 3 million views, Linus Tech Tips. Just like Linus, this next thumbnail takes a ridiculous idea and places it within everyday occurrences. Don't believe me? Well, the crew over at RC Test Flight wants you to know that you can, in fact, cut your grass with a laser beam. What? This is the perfect Jedi mind trick thumbnail. First thing you see is probably the laser and then the text referring to the laser. But what you first notice is not the genius of the thumbnail. As your eyes scan the rest of the thumbnail in shock at a laser cutting the grass, you might finally notice the thing that you're supposed to see. And that is the lawnmower. Noticing the lawnmower in relation to the laser is a perfect example of object familiarity. It's not normal outside of time travelers to imagine a laser doing a better job cutting grass than a lawnmower. The lawnmower makes the thumbnail feel more grounded, despite the insanity of a laser being next to it. This is actually a trend with high-level YouTubers. Sometimes just placing a familiar object in opposition to an object that you don't normally see there is enough to get viewers to stop and wonder, what the heck is that doing there? But congrats on your unsurprising 6 million views. I will never look at my lawnmower the same, ever again. The last two thumbnails were pretty straightforward because they pushed your brain to rationalize something that shouldn't work at all in reality. But what if we took the reality completely out of the equation? This next thumbnail is pure nightmare fuel and kept me awake for days. Okay, maybe that was just the thought of my old YouTube thumbnails. Horses on YouTube is the channel that made this thumbnail, and aside from not having a single clue how their videos relate to actual horses, here is a thumbnail with a huge, likely angry cat monster standing in front of a human who is likely to have had his last home-cooked meal. This thumbnail does the exact opposite of tell you anything about it. So why does it have 2 million views when other videos on this channel average about 100,000? Well, what Horses on YouTube, sorry, it gets me every time. What Horses does well is what I would like to call emotional familiarity. And what is the obvious emotion you are feeling right now as you look at this thumbnail? I'll give you a hint. It's fear. Some sort of fear is deeply rooted in every normal person. Some people have a fear of heights. Some people have a fear of water. But I would argue the majority of people have a fear of death or loneliness. Those are the familiar feelings evoked when you see this human standing alone in front of such a terrifying force. The sympathy is instant, and it doesn't even matter that the title is called Marcus Aurelius Solved the Universe, because the thumbnail achieved its purpose anyways. It got you to shop at their window longer and debate going in. Although I would not want to go in if I saw this particular cat monster just right inside the front door. Let's do a quick test. I'm gonna show you two thumbnails from the local project. One of them has 358,000 views and the other has 98,000 views within a 3-day stretch. Can you guess which one has the most views? Before I reveal the answer, there is one element of both thumbnails that I do not care for. In my opinion, the treatment of the text itself could have been done in a slightly different way to make it stand out more from the background. Text is not always needed on a thumbnail, especially when there's a picturesque scene or a picturesque view. But back to the quiz. If you managed to pick the Palms residence thumbnail, then you are right. But why? Turns out a landscaper approved thumbnail does numbers. But joking aside, the color green is a fantastic contrast to colors like white and brown. That's what makes the thumbnail miles ahead of the other one. The blending of the different contrasting colors makes everything stand out without whitewashing everything like in the other thumbnail. In the second thumbnail, the whitewashing makes everything look like it's blurred together. Speaking of backgrounds, the next thumbnail falls into a pretty common trap that you may have seen before. What happens when you take an extremely bad picture in a poorly lit room and add a ton of motion blur? Apparently 1 million views. What? This is what I like to call the celebrity effect, or a more proper YouTube term, the established audience effect. Write that down. I think we all agree that the thumbnail is a poor choice, but because Mac Miller is an established brand and has a massive established audience, well into the millions, of course a music video is going to be highly searched and bring in the views. In a different way, this is what happens with guys like Moist Critical, who don't even bother putting up a thumbnail. They just put up a picture of them on stream and it does millions of views. It's because they have an established audience. You and I cannot get away with that anytime soon. What's crazy though is not how many views this poor thumbnail is getting, but how many views it could have gotten had it been a better thumbnail. It could have had over 5 million views with a more attractive and higher production value thumbnail. What if I told you that some of the greatest YouTubers on the platform use one simple, highly effective tactic to improve their clickability? Sounds too good to be true? Take a look at this thumbnail from Donut. No, not that kind of donut. Do you see how the colors seem to pop right off the screen? That's because they use a technique called saturation, and they use it heavily in this thumbnail. Thumbnails with high saturation tend to outperform thumbnails without saturation. Higher saturation tends to make the thumbnail colors brighter and more vibrant and rich, which helps them appear more clickable than other thumbnails in the same feed. In this image, the brightest and most colorful object in the entire thumbnail is actually the boot, and its position is dead center. This is on purpose, by the way. You want your focal point to generally be in the center of your thumbnail. The rich yellow of the boot gives your audience a reason to pause and see what's around it. Then they notice the deep red and blues and are way more likely to click. I'm not saying it's only about the color in thumbnails. The concept and action matter a lot in thumbnails like these. But it's good to bear in mind that generally speaking, humans have a profound interest in brighter color palettes. That's why stop signs and caution tape and warning labels are generally lighter in color because they cause hesitation. They make you stop and think about what you're seeing. This thumbnail is quickly surpassing 2 million views in less than a week. But we can't really talk about saturation and not at least mention the king of saturation himself, MrBeast. If you haven't been paying attention to MrBeast recently, he is closing in on 200 million subscribers on his main channel. But on his road to becoming the king of YouTube, he noticed some trends along the way. He realized that heavy saturation complements his over-the-top video ideas really well. His thumbnails alone inspired millions of other creators to copy this heavy saturation style. This thumbnail is one of my favorites from him, and just like the others we have mentioned, the subject of interest is dead in the middle of the screen, in focus and also saturated. The tan middle raft that he's on contrasts really well with the blue background. This is one of my favorites, and just like the previous thumbnails we've mentioned, the main subject stands out through a combination of saturation and contrast. There is one more trick that MrBeast and other YouTubers use that is not only subtle, but incredibly powerful. And very few people realize they've been staring at it the whole time. In almost every video in the last year for MrBeast, he has used a blue or green style background. Why? Research has shown that blue and or green colors in your thumbnail improve the click-through rate. From now on, when you look at other thumbnails, I want you to keep track of how many people are using this blue and green background strategy. And then I want you to comment back on this video. I bet you never really noticed it before, but you will now. With 120 million views in less than 2 weeks, I wonder where this one will end up on his greatest hits list. As excellent as that MrBeast thumbnail is, what if I told you there is a thumbnail that blows that one out of the water? Sorry, couldn't help myself. Mike Shake and his team get the award for top thumbnail. Just look at it. I don't even usually care about whips or men in white t-shirts, but that phone destruction looks crazy. Can you imagine how long it took to get the details right? The exposed phone motherboard, the cracking effect, the glass and fragments flying everywhere, the color contrast, the blue background, the red phone, the action, the cuts on Mike's arms, the rings and the stumps, the different segments on the whip, the blurred end of the whip. This thumbnail appeals to his general audience and also the tech audience who would love to see iPhones just get whacked. I don't know what more to say, but it's as close to perfection in a thumbnail that I have seen in a very long time. And it uses all of the traits mentioned previously in this video. While that thumbnail probably blew you away with its exaggerated realism, the next thumbnail takes on a totally different approach and artistic style. It's really neat. And probably one of the most unique and different thumbnails I have ever seen. It assumes you know exactly who Ludwig and CDawg are, but even if you don't, every box is ticked. You have the blue background, you have the green and red contrasting colors, an interesting and totally unique storyline of someone getting hit in whack-a-mole. The details are presented in a more abstract style, but it works well because the story and goal is still clear. Major props to the designer on this one for just saying, forget the metas, I'm just gonna make a really freaking cool thumbnail. Speaking of abstract thumbnails, the final thumbnail I'm going to show you flips a lot of what we have gone over in the video on its head. Entropy. What even is entropy? Well, it's a physics concept, and that's about the extent of what my brain could understand. But even if I don't know what entropy is, I would be very tempted to click on a thumbnail that looks like Mark Rober's Devil's toothpaste blowing up everywhere. That is a really hard line to say. And on a side note, those 4 words took me like 10 takes to say, so you're welcome. I love the simplicity and yet the insanity of this thumbnail. The color is chaotic, but contrasts wonderfully with the words because the background is slightly blurred. Unlike the home showcase thumbnails, we can easily see the thick text that's front and center. This thumbnail may not be as technically complicated as the others that have been made with AI, but it still grabs attention and instills curiosity as to this mysterious, bold word that nobody knows. Hope you enjoyed that. Quick thing, this video took a surprisingly long amount of time to track down these thumbnails and analyze everything. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate you consider subscribing and checking out these other videos up here. More videos on the way. See you in the next one.